Hey, Sharmin.
Hey, Cheryl, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. So happy to be here.
Same here. This is exciting. We are finally doing this, getting this off the ground and into the air.
Yes, we are. Woo. Are you nervous?
Yeah, I think a little bit, but I'm excited. It's kind of that excited, nervous.
Okay.
How about you?
Me too.
Okay. I think the value of what we can share overrides me being too nervous to do that. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. And I totally agree.
Good.
We have so much to share, so many stories, so many personal experiences. And this is the perfect platform for us to do so.
And not just us. We have a whole panel of special guests joining us. Some days 2, some days 4, some days 5. There's different panelists on every show sometimes, but everybody brings a different experience and a story and some support and some resources for our listeners.
Exactly. And that's what I love about our panel, the diversity and the difference. So
Absolutely.
I'm excited.
What do you think we're going to talk about? I know we've covered a few subjects. We've covered divorce and trauma. What else have we done shows already on?
We did sleep.
Oh, we did the elusive sleep.
And transition or change.
That was a big one.
Yes.
And we had some fun with the travel show.
Oh, yes. That was fun.
It was fun. And we've got many more to cover. And we're also very open to our listeners to sending us a message and letting us know if there's something they want us to talk about.
Exactly. And I think that is going to be a valuable contribution to the show.
Absolutely.
Meeting the needs of our listeners.
And every time we get together and we pick a topic, I think the interesting thing is, whatever the topic is, we've all had some connection to it, no matter what it was, whether it was a direct connection or a parental connection or your child's connection. It didn't seem to matter. Everyone had something to say about everything we talked about, which I thought was really interesting and very cool.
Yeah. And that's the synergy in the group or the panel.
Absolutely. Yes. And how are we going to start the panel? How are we going to start our podcast?
With grounding. Throwing away, I like what you say, put away the to-do list. Put away the laundry list, put away all the things that we have to do just for 30 minutes. Yes. When that time that is spent with us.
That's right. We value your time with us and we value our time together. And we're just so excited for all of this.
Yes.
So we are going to drop every Wednesday. We'll have a new episode. And once again, if you have something you want us to discuss, send us a message. Don't forget to subscribe, share it to somebody who you think our podcast is going to help for that day, that time, or forever.
And you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
So I guess we'll see you on the other side.
Yes.
All right. Once again, Transforming Lives podcast panel, and we'll see you at the next show. Welcome to the Transforming Lives panel podcast, and we're really grateful you're here to listen to us again today. We are going to start off, as we typically do, with a quick grounding, and we're going to have Kate take over our grounding for today. Kate?
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you. If you can just feel your seat in your chair, feel your lower back being supported by the back of your chair. If it's comfortable to close your eyes or just relax the gaze off the tip of your nose, to feel your feet on the floor. And then if it's possible to tune into the floor rising up to support your feet. And really just being present with the energy of what is it like to tune into the soles of your feet. And to feel where they rest on the floor, and to also feel how that floor or the earth rises up to support you. And then as you tune into the energy of the earth supporting your feet, if you can feel that running up your calves, your thighs, your sit bones, the front and back of your body, your shoulders, your neck, and up to the crown of your head. Just feel what that energy feels like running up from the earth through your body. And as you tune into that energy, if you can bring awareness that we're all connected to the same earth, that we're all feeling that same energy coming from the earth, running through our bodies, wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And how through that energy, we are all connected.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. So today's topic, we're going to talk about trauma, and we're all going to share our stories of what our trauma is and what it means to us. And I think it's really important to always consider that every trauma is different for us. And if we're listening to someone's extreme trauma, sometimes we feel like, oh, mine's not that bad. I should feel lucky. And you don't validate your own trauma. And I don't think the healing begins until you validate your own trauma. So I think it's really important as we go through our stories, and for our listeners to listen and really validate how the trauma affects you. The definition of trauma is to have a deep distressing experience. And so anything that affects you like that is trauma. And so I think we need to really keep that in mind as we listen and share. And so I'm going to start. And I'm going to go with my actually most recent trauma for me. And it starts as grief and loss. And the trauma gets built in. So I am an only child and was a caregiver of my dad, who just passed in December with dementia. And there's that path of grief and loss. People lose their parents, people lose their family members, and there's the stages and all of that. I think the trauma for me came with, I always promised my dad he would be at home. He would never have to leave the home. We would do whatever we could. We would pay whoever we could pay, and he would just stay home. And unfortunately, 2 weeks before he passed, he wound up having a stroke. And so this isn't something we could manage. It's not, my mom was 82, so she couldn't manage this. So we wound up, having to go to the hospital, and the whole time in the hospital, between the sundowning and the anger, there was the, pleading and begging to take him home. And it was the one time in my entire 58 years that I felt like I really let my dad down. And so that sits with me. I accept the loss. I accept that I have to go through this grieving process. I accept that, we like to think we've worked through our trauma. I'm not. It's too fresh for me. I'm still leaning on therapy and self-talk. I'm constantly reminding myself that if someone I love was going through this, what I would say to them, I try to say to myself. But there is that grief and loss that comes with death, but there's that trauma that sits with me, this trauma of guilt that impacts me every day, all day, where I'm constantly trying to speak to him and just give me a sign. I'm going through all of those things. To let me know that you forgive me. And it's bizarre because we had this relationship that was like no other relationship I can imagine a father and daughter having. And we shared secrets and we had this, so I really feel like the trauma for me in this situation is the guilt that sits with that I just have not been able to validate or justify that I did everything I possibly could to support him and give him everything he wanted, because he gave me everything I wanted my whole life. Mm-hmm. So no, I'm not done with this. I'm still working through it. I think when you're an only child, you don't have someone that knows exactly how you feel in that family situation. And yeah, I think that I'm still really working through this, but that's the first thing that came up for me when we thought, oh, let's share our stories of trauma. That's definitely one that is sitting with me, and I think will sit with me for a long time to come. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Cheryl. I could talk about trauma probably for weeks. That's the realm that I work in, and I love getting curious about people's trauma. And I really see it as the gateway, once somebody's able to start to look at their trauma, it is really the gateway to healing. I am a believer that everyone is on, as Gabor Mate would say, the spectrum of trauma. I don't think any of us aren't. I think if you're born, you have trauma. And the work that I do is all about going back and seeing how unhealed childhood trauma manifests in adulthood. And even though it seems like something that is happening right in front of me now, maybe might have me thinking what is happening in front of me right now is where this is coming from. If we really can be with it and, circle all the way down to the roots, we'll see how old or how familiar it is. So, for example, if something happens and, maybe your throat tightens or you feel a tightness in your stomach, or you can't make your brain connect to your words. And if you would just get curious about how familiar does that feel? Oh, tightness in my stomach. Anytime somebody is aggressive towards me, I feel that tightness in my stomach. Then that's how we know it's not about what's happening in front of us right now. So, as I said, I was born, so for sure I have trauma. I know my trauma started very young, and there's been things throughout my whole life that have people could have called traumatic, and some people could have gone through the same thing and it didn't affect them the same way. And so I think another really thing is trauma is really, really individual and specific to you. And that, and as you said, Cheryl, there could be this energy of comparing trauma, or, it wasn't as bad as. And I would just offer that we are all welcome to get really curious about ourselves, and that there is no fingers to point, because everybody was raised by somebody, and that, and that freedom. I am a self-compassion coach, but that freedom of really understanding ourselves in a self-compassionate and loving way, for me has just been absolutely transformational, and is what allows me to have that different perspective of, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you and where is that in your body and how can we get curious about it? Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Oh, thank you, Kate and Cheryl, for sharing. Each of you, what you shared, it's always interesting how when you connect with people, how someone will say something that kind of parallels or triggers something else. Like when you said the spectrum, like I've been recently, I guess being encountered by people, which now I say we're all on the spectrum, just some people haven't been given a diagnosis, but I think we are the spectrum of whatever that it means. And so I'm encountering, like I may have mentioned this before, but it's like daily I'm being, certain people were always like attracted to me, well, special, I would say special, whatever. They come to me. But now I'm seeing what, even that's why I said we're all on the spectrum, because some things I didn't even know. And some diagnoses of what people say that they are triggered by, I wasn't even aware of. So I'm constantly being awoken to all these new things. And I guess for me, the grief that I was choosing to share happened maybe in 2001, like a month after 9/11. And I was staying with my great aunt, and she was bedridden for like 15 years, and I was taking care of her. And then she was hospitalized, and they said it was cancer. And so all of this stuff was like kind of fast and rapid. But the thing was that her mental, I didn't know what it was. I just knew that she was not herself in the hospital and she wanted to come home. So if you've been in a house like for all of 50 years almost, and now you're in a hospital, and I think her greatest fear was she wanted to go to a certain hospital. And so she got to go to that hospital, which afterwards I would say, oh, if you want to go to a pretty hospital, go there. If you want to go to, if you want to live, you go to the other hospital, where she was not choosing. So while she was there, she has a son. And so she's in the hospital. They tell her that, oh, she needs this, she needs that, something with the thyroid. If you take her home, she probably will not live. I was okay with that, because what was important to me was that she have her wish the way she wanted, and she wanted to go home. So in the hospital, it's like she's like a whole nother person. Now she's 89 and she's seeing things, she's making accusations, she's not in her right mind. Now, I don't know if that was medication, what the case was. So I got permission from her son, to have her come home. She came home. All those symptoms went away. I was at peace. And then, she got on the phone. She talked, had a normal conversation. She asked for something to eat. And she, maybe shortly after that, as far as I was concerned, she passed away. So the reason I'm saying this story is that someone would be spared this, the DNR, and how important that is to know what someone's dying wish is. And to have, if you are that person or you're a caretaker, to have it in your home, because I brought her home that night. I did not have it. So when I called 911, I'm saying, like, as far as I could tell, she had deceased. And when they took her and threw her on the floor, and it was just like I snapped. It was just like, I lost my mind. Like, I screamed. And for me, it was just like, why are they doing this? Like, this is not what she wanted. But I was just screaming, because I'm like, I did all of that to get her to come home and to go whichever way she chose, which was not to be resuscitated. And so, like you, Cheryl, I felt like, I didn't succeed in giving someone their wish. So what happened was she went to the hospital, and then what happened shortly, she had a grandson and like a stepdaughter. And I never went back to the hospital because I just could not like deal with that. And so they were able to go to the hospital, and she was on life support. And so they were able, I guess the only way I could make this make sense and be like, okay, well, there's a reason for everything, is that they were able to go and say their goodbye. And then my aunt, who lives around the block from me, had the do not resuscitate, and brought that, and then they took her off for life support. But so I say all of that for someone to be prepared in that time, to make sure that you have that with you. If like even in home hospice, because I've dealt with that too, just have what you need to give that person their last wish, so that something like that does, because that was traumatic to me. I mean, it may have been okay if she wanted to be resuscitated, but she didn't. So, and because I didn't have the paper and didn't think about that at the time, there was an intervention. And, you know, the only way I could rectify it, like I said, was they gave someone else an opportunity, and I had to be okay with that. But for me, life ended here when I called 911. So that was traumatic. I could like sometimes still hear and I'm not a person that gets emotional and scream and do all of that, but I did it that day. So I just, you know, want someone to get to be prepared, because it's the thing that we least do certain times with good intentions. And everybody waits to the last minute to properly have things in order because they don't want to deal with it. So that's my message regarding that story.
Thank you, Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting as we've been sort of talking here, a couple of different things. I have a lot of different traumas I can choose from. So it's, but the first one that popped into my mind when we sort of said we were going to talk about this topic was when I was about 8 years old, and my mother came to me and, you know, she said, you know, I have to tell you someone has died. And so I asked who, and she wouldn't tell me. And she kept making me guess who it was who had died. And so I guessed different names, you know, and then I got to my Amma, who was, in fact, who had passed away. And we were very close, and my mother knew that. But I had this horrible guilt from then on because of everybody I named before I got to her, right? Like it was like I was, my mother, I felt like my mother made me like, you know, I felt guilty for ranking my relatives and you know, I should guess who I guessed first and everything. And it was a really hard thing for me to process and deal with. And I know my mom just did not deal well with death in general. From her background, from her father died when she was 17 and she didn't process it well. And my father's mother died when I was 1.5 and he didn't process it well. So I guess they just didn't know how to deal with death. But that first experience for me, I remember when I'd see those other relatives that I had named before my great grandmother, I just felt horrible guilt. And it took me time kind of working through it and realizing, you know, I was 7 or 8 years old. Like you just, you know, you feel bad for who you did first, but you're a kid and you know, I was going partially by age and partially by how close I was and all those things. But as I say, it kind of took time, and I had an anger towards my mother for putting me through that took me some time to process. And then, you know, as you get older, you realize, you know, people do the best they can with the skills they have, and everybody brings with them traumas that they've had in their life and life experiences that they've had, and, you know, the way that they process things. And I know I've made mistakes in the way I've dealt with some things with my kids when I've had to tell them really hard things. You know, you think you might be doing the thing, and then after the fact, you talk with them and realize, you know what, we probably should have approached it in a different way. But that's part of life's journey, right? It doesn't come with a manual, and we go up and down and we deal with these things. And so you have to learn to forgive yourself, you know, or the person who created the trauma. You have to, in order for you both to be able to move forward. So that's kind of, I guess what I would sort of say is that empowering is realizing that, you know, we all have our baggage, we all have our different traumas, and just keep doing the best you can and forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Energy.
Absolutely. Oh, I was putting myself in your shoes as an 8-year-old, and I couldn't imagine having to figure out, you know, which family member. So thank you for sharing that. And for me, I will speak to or from going through a divorce. And it's one thing to go through a divorce just as an adult, as the spouse, but then adding on the extra layer of having a child involved. And for me, I had never experienced that before. Of course, when you get married, at least for me, I didn't go into my marriage thinking that it would end, in the manner of how it did. And it was very difficult and quite challenging having to experience the many emotions that I did. I don't think that I experienced quite as many emotions ever prior to that point. It's been about 16 years or so now, and hindsight being what it is, 2020, I can definitely say if I knew now what I knew back then, I would have given myself more grace. When going through a divorce, it's like a death. You're separating and you're ending an entire relationship. You're ending something that was created. And having to process that, having to figure all of that out while still living the day-to-day responsibilities of work, being in school, and needing to just make sure I take care of myself, being a mom, all of that definitely took a toll. However, for me, what helped me get through it is just knowing that I I know better. I know that there's more to life after this. I know that there's more positive things that can come from it. And for me, my faith, speaking personally, my faith is also what helped me get through it as well, to the point of where now it was a big reason of what made me become the self-mastery coach and the single parents coach, because I've been there. I know what it's like to go through the conversations of where you try to focus on what's most important. If there's a child involved, you try to focus on doing what's best for your child, but then knowing you have all of these thoughts, all of these emotions, all of these feelings that you need to get out, you want to get out, but you have to make a decision in the moment of, is this the right time? Is this the best time? Am I in a healthy emotional mindset or a healthy emotional state in order to have these conversations? And it really, honestly, it was like a blessing in disguise. It helped me become who I am today, which is a very certain person, someone who is more self-assured, someone who is more confident. And I use that as my one thing. And what I mean by that is I use that as the motivation of anytime that I come to face with something else, like an obstacle or another situation that may be really tough. I say that, if I was able to make it through that divorce, then I can make it through this, or I can make it through anything else. And so I use that as now strength to get through anything that comes my way now. And what I do today to be able to help support other people who are going through it is first help them just make sense of it all. Because a lot of times going through a separation, a breakup, a divorce, it's the unknown of, well, why am I feeling this way? Or why did this happen? Or for some people, they may say it caught them off guard, or they didn't see the signs. And it's just all of these various thoughts that cause the other emotions to rise. And it's just all about making it make sense, doing whatever you can to just make it make sense. And one more thing that I'll share that also helped me get through it is just understanding that I can only control what I can actually control. And that comes from, or I'm pulling from, the serenity prayer that a lot of people may be familiar with. But once I really learned and grasped onto that concept and that understanding of whatever's in my control is the only thing that I can do, the only thing that I can worry about, and I can't worry about anything else. I can't worry about other people or other things. That really started to help me make progress in my development, in my personal development, in my growth, and me maturing. And that's one thing that I will leave as part of this first initial statement that I'm making right now, is to just make things make sense. Do your best to just get an understanding of it and focus on what you can actually control. So I'll pause there for now.
Thank you so much, Energy. And I want to share, before I share my trauma story, a quote by Brené Brown. And it goes, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we'll ever do. And I am listening to you. I had a trauma story I wanted to share, but I'm going to share one that women scarcely talk about. Medical trauma. I call it medical trauma. And that quote by Brené Brown is something that provided me with courage to look this particular trauma in its face and to endure. Because when you live a life of multiple traumatic experiences, you become immune to trauma, but having abdominal pains and going to the ER and having to experience an exploratory surgery and wake up the next day to news that they found cancer is something that no one is ever prepared for. I was never prepared for that, never experienced that. No one in my family has ever experienced that. And I thought that, oh, I am so immune to traumatic experiences, but that was one that I was not prepared for. And this is the first time I am sharing this story, and I'm not bawling. And despite it happened 11 years ago, that form of trauma, we must grieve and we must treat it as a loss, especially when we lose our body parts. And for women, when we are socialized to believe and think that being a woman includes that reproductive system. And despite what age you are, when you lose your reproductive system, it takes time to recover, because you're thinking that this is what makes me a woman, and I have lost it. And I had to develop the skills to grieve at the loss of those body parts. And it was not easy. It was not like overcoming childhood traumas, because here you are, you're an adult. And what inspired me is my courage and my bravery, because I wanted to learn more about it. I didn't know anything about that. So I took the courage and I started a Facebook page about ovarian and fallopian tube cancer so that I can learn, because I was never given the opportunity to receive a diagnosis and think about it. I just woke up and this is the news that I have. And that process has taught me and given me the tools to help other women to listen to your body. And whenever you listen to your body and your body speaks, you need to respond and respond accordingly. And just as when we lose loved ones, we mourn and we grieve, when we lose body parts, we need to grieve and we need to embrace that loss. And it's a process like any other healing, like the psychological healings that we experience after traumas. That same psychological healing and fortitude is needed when we lose our body parts as women. And for the women that are listening to us, I want to encourage you to listen to your body. And in my culture, when you have abdominal pains, we all self-diagnose. And we like to say, oh, it's gas. Or we say it's wind. Do not self-diagnose. Do not seek answers from Dr. Google. What you need to do is go to your doctor if you're having unusual abdominal pains or experiencing anything unusual abdominally. Please go to your doctor. Request a sonogram, because ovarian cancer is the silent killer. And a sonogram, usually we say pap smears. I had a pap smear 30 days before this experience. So please, a sonogram, if you have relatives in your family that may have had breast cancer or ovarian or fallopian tube cancer, get a BRCA test, BRCA 1 and 2. Ensure that you are taking care of yourself. And if you've suffered any form of medical trauma, please take some time to grieve the loss and to heal.
Thank you for sharing, Sharmin. That was really special to share that and very deep. And I think you really hit home on a really, really important thing, which is listening to your body, listening to our bodies and fighting for yourself. You have to be a self-advocate. I've had some medical traumas as well, and we don't have time right now. I'll go into it maybe in one of the other trauma ones that we do. But, the only reason I'm still here is because I advocated for myself and I wouldn't leave the hospital when they told me to. And we have to advocate for ourselves and for our family and stuff, because, like you say, you have to be in tune and listen to your own body.
Yeah, interesting you say that, Mitzy, because when we were in the hospital with my dad the last week, we were in the stroke unit because of the stroke as opposed to a dementia unit. And they had taken him for a test for something. And when he came back, he was so, he had gone into the sundowning. He was angry. He was, and to know my dad, literally, I've never heard my father raise his voice. Never. He was, Barney Rubble from the Flintstones. That was my dad. And so when the sundowning hit, which I only experienced, luckily, thank God, a few times, it was just, oh, you're not my daughter. Don't ever tell me you love me. You don't care about me. And it was horrendous. I tried to break my hands when I was trying to hold his hands. It was just something I'd never experienced. So he came back from one of these tests and it was terrible. And I said to the doctor, what are you testing for? And he's, well, we want to make sure if it's a stroke, maybe it's something in his brain. We need him to do a brain scan. And he's 87 and he has dementia. What are you going to do if you find a brain tumor? My dad's not having chemo. My dad's not having surgery. Well, I know, but we need to rule things out. So it was the opposite. I'm saying, no more of this. He's, we did luckily have a DNR, and we actually were, starting the conversation about MAID. So there's another thing. I mean, we can go into this in another episode for sure, because this MAID has a lot of different, in Canada anyway, has a lot of different fine print that you don't know is happening until you want to put it into process. So that can actually, we'll leave that because I think that can be something, again, need to prepare. Luckily, because of this experience, now my mom has done everything that is needed to be done. But I, it's just complete opposite, right? You're advocating for your health. And I'm like, nope, not in this case. So it was just so different that the doctors were so insistent to do all of these tests. And I'm like, okay, but whatever the results are, what do you think is going to happen? There's no. So I see what, I feel like every story we just went through, we could dive into it, like divorce. I got you, MG. I got you.
Lots to unpack.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's an awful lot there. So we can just open this up. Does anybody have questions, anything to share, anything else?
Go for it, Katrina.
Oh, I just want to thank everyone. I think, of course, we'll find how connected we all are, because I can relate to all these stories. But just from speaking, stories and finding that common connection and being able to sum it up with some advice, I think probably we all did. And it will be the best benefit of having a podcast to, tell the story. But the best benefit is to have someone benefit from it, from our sharing. So I thank you all. And I look forward to more trauma stories, but with how we overcame.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for sharing today. It was a fabulous time together. And I think we realize that it's a domino effect, right? As you start unpacking one thing, more and more things. So I think we unpacked probably about 40 topics out of today's session that we'll be able to go deeper on some of our future podcasts. And we invite you, the audience, to be sending us, what topics you would like us to be discussing too. And if there's particular traumas that maybe some of our audience has had that they would like to get our feedback on how we process similar things, something, because that's, really what we want to be doing in this podcast panel is being here so that people know, one, they're not alone. Two, you can get through these things. And three, other people have gone through them and, working together and helping each other. So that's what we're wanting to do with this podcast panel, is share our experiences, but also get from you, the audience, what you're looking for, so that we're here to help you the best way that we can.
Mm-hmm.
Kate,
Yeah, well said.
And I'd love to share, I believe it's Rumi who says, don't turn away from the bandaged part, because that's where the light comes in.
That's beautiful. Well, anyone have anything else to add? Go ahead, Sharmin.
I just wanted to add that by sharing our stories, it demonstrates ownership of our experiences, and it provides us a platform to process our healing. And I just want to encourage our listeners to do the same. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for listening to the Transforming Lives podcast panel. We are grateful for all of you listening and grateful for everyone on this panel. Thank you so much, and we'll chat with you next time. And that's a wrap for the Transforming Lives podcast panel, where we strive to embrace, inspire, and empower our community.
Be sure to subscribe and download. Also, don't forget to leave a review and check the show notes for resources and contacts for all of us. Thank you for listening and see you next time.
Thank you, Sharmin.
Thank you, Cheryl.